You ever wake up camping way out in the middle of nowhere and just feel that something is fundamentally wrong? Not like, oh, I heard a twig snap, but a deep, cold dread settling in your stomach before you even know why. That was me last fall. We were deep in the Allegheny National Forest, miles from any real road. The first warning sign, my hiking boots. They were just gone, not misplaced inside the tent, not kicked under a log. And then I saw it. Just beyond the dying embers of last night's fire pit, maybe 15 feet from my tent, a patch of disturbed earth. It wasn't large, maybe 2 feet long, 1 foot wide, freshly turned. My heart started pounding against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the unnatural quiet. I crept closer, my bare feet cold on the wet leaves, every nerve ending screaming. And there they were, my boots, not tossed aside, not half hidden. They were buried. I couldn't just leave them there. My hands were shaking as I knelt down, the damp earth cold and gritty under my fingers. I dug my boots out, brushing off the clumps of soil. They felt heavier than usual, imbued with a wrongness I couldn't explain. I carried them back to my tent, glancing nervously over my shoulder the entire time, scanning the dense tree line that pressed in on our little clearing. Every shadow seemed too deep, every rustle of leaves a potential threat. We spent the rest of the morning trying to shake it off, trying to pretend it was just a bizarre, isolated incident. Liam tried to make jokes, but they fell flat. Chloe kept nervously scanning the trees, jumping at every bird call. I cleaned my boots obsessively by the small stream near our camp, scrubbing away the dirt, trying to scrub away the feeling of violation, the feeling that something unseen had handled them, imbued them with something else. But the cold feeling lingered. Lunch was a quiet affair. Nobody had much appetite. We huddled around the rekindled campfire even though the day wasn't particularly cold. It was more for comfort, a small circle of light and warmth against the encroaching shadows and the oppressive silence of the woods. Liam finally broke the tension, or tried to. "Okay, look," he said, poking at the fire with a stick. Maybe it's some weird local thing, like people leave offerings or something." Chloe shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. Offerings. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in bruised purples and oranges above the tree line, the atmosphere in the camp grew thicker, heavier. The temperature dropped, and the dampness seemed to seep into our bones. We triple-checked the tents, zipped everything up tight, secured the food bag high in a tree far from camp. I made sure my boots were inside my tent this time, tucked right beside my sleeping bag. Sleep, when it finally came, was fitful, shallow, plagued by dreams I couldn't quite remember upon waking, leaving only residues of fear and unease. I jolted awake sometime deep in the night, my heart hammering. Silence. Absolute, profound silence. The fire must have died down to embers. Even the usual night insects seemed quiet. It was the kind of silence that screams louder than any noise. I strained my ears, holding my breath, and then I heard it, faint but undeniable, scratching. Morning couldn't come soon enough. When the first weak rays of light finally filtered through the trees, painting the inside of the tent a pale gray, it felt like surfacing from underwater. I cautiously unzipped the flap, peering out. Nothing. The campsite looked exactly as we'd left it, fire dead, dew heavy on the grass. No tracks near my tent, nothing disturbed. It was almost too normal. I checked the ground outside where I'd heard the scratching. The leaf litter was thick, damp. We practically ran the trail back to the car. The hike out felt twice as long as the hike in. The woods that had seemed beautiful and inviting 2 days ago now felt menacing, claustrophobic. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like grasping fingers. The silence was gone, replaced by a cacophony of small sounds, rustling leaves, snapping twigs, distant bird calls that all sounded like pursuit. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every gust of wind whispered warnings. The drive back was mostly silent. The radio played softly, generic pop songs sounding jarringly out of place after the profound quiet of the woods. We were all lost in our own thoughts, processing the strangeness, the fear. Liam kept glancing in the rearview mirror, not just for traffic but scanning the sides of the road, the trees that lined the highway. Chloe stared out the window, her expression distant, unsettled. I found myself compulsively checking my feet, flexing my toes inside the heavy boots. A few days passed. Life tried to resume its normal rhythm. Work, errands, seeing friends, though not Liam or Chloe. We exchanged a few texts, brief and awkward, but didn't meet up. But the unease lingered, a constant background hum beneath the surface of everyday life. I found myself becoming hyper-aware of strange details. A patch of freshly turned earth in a neighbor's garden bed that made my stomach clench. The way shadows fell across my bedroom wall at night. And the boots. One evening, about a week after the trip, I was taking out the trash. As I walked down the back alley behind my apartment building, something caught my eye near the overflowing dumpster. At first, I thought it was just more garbage someone had dumped carelessly. But as I got closer, my steps slowed, my breath catching in my throat. Partially buried under a pile of discarded newspapers and food wrappers were shoes. Not boots this time. A pair of old, worn-out sneakers, placed side by side, laces tucked in. Seeing those sneakers in the alley broke something in me. The attempt at normalcy, the effort to rationalize, just crumbled. This wasn't random. It wasn't a prank. It was something, and it was connected to me, or at least aware of me. The boots by my back door suddenly felt like ticking time bombs. What were they? Why were mine chosen? What did burying them signify? And more importantly, what was buried in that spot before my boots were placed there? I told Liam everything then. The scratching outside my tent that night, the whispering Chloe thought she heard, and finally the sneakers I found buried in the alley. His face went pale as I described the identical arrangement. "No way," he breathed, shaking his head. "No freaking way, that's impossible, Alex." But the look in his eyes said he believed me. The shared experience in the woods, the lingering fear, made the impossible seem terrifyingly plausible. What does it mean? Convincing Liam took the rest of the beer and another one after that. Chloe was a harder sell. When Liam called her, she initially refused point blank. "Absolutely not, you're both insane. I'm not going anywhere near those woods again." But Liam, perhaps fueled by a mix of alcohol and his own fear, managed to persuade her. Or maybe she just didn't want us going back there alone. The drive back up to the Allegheny National Forest was thick with tension. Nobody spoke much. Chloe sat rigidly in the back seat, staring out the window, twisting a loose thread on her jeans. Liam gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched. I watched the familiar highway signs pass with a sense of unreality. Were we really doing this? Driving back towards the source of our terror? The first bite of the shovel into the dark earth felt like a violation. The soil was soft, yielding too easily. It wasn't packed hard like the surrounding ground. It was loose, crumbly, and strangely cold to the touch, even through the metal of the shovel. Liam and I took turns digging, the rhythmic scrape and thud of the shovels the only sounds breaking the oppressive silence. Chloe watched, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide with fear. We didn't have to dig deep. We stared down at the tiny, ancient shoes, horrified into silence. The implications were chilling. A child lost or buried out here long ago. And someone or something knew about it, marking the spot with my boots. Or perhaps whatever presence resided here used shoes, any shoes, as markers, as anchors, connecting the living to the dead. The air grew perceptibly colder, the silence deeper, more profound. We ran. We didn't stop running until our lungs burned and our legs screamed in protest. The horrible keening sound followed us for what felt like miles, echoing through the trees, sometimes seeming right behind us, sometimes seeming to come from ahead, cutting off our escape. It was everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied cry of rage and sorrow that clawed at our sanity. We didn't dare look back. We just pushed forward, fueled by pure terror. It's been 6 months since that second trip. Liam moved across the country 2 weeks later, didn't even say goodbye in person, just sent a text. "Chloe, I see her sometimes from a distance. She looks older, haunted. We don't talk, there's nothing left to say. We share a secret too heavy for conversation. And me, I live with it, every single day. The memory of those little shoes, the sound of that wail, I threw my hiking boots away." Everyone talks about the things that go wrong during a camping trip, right? The weird noises outside the tent, getting lost, that creepy feeling of being watched in the woods. Yeah, we had some of that on our last trip up near Black Creek, enough that Sarah, my wife, swore off camping for good. But for me, the real horror didn't start until we got back home. It started with the dust. We'd been gone a week and I was doing a quick check around the house, making sure everything was okay. So my first thought wasn't human. Rats maybe. Raccoons, we'd had problems before. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept on the shelf down there, the beam cutting a shaky circle through the gloom. I nudged the plywood door fully open. The smell hit me then, stronger than the usual basement damp. It was stale. Stale air, stale sweat, something vaguely organic underneath it all, like old food left somewhere hidden. It wasn't the smell of an animal nest, it was disturbingly human. I pulled the notebook out, my hand shaking just a little. Back upstairs, under the harsh fluorescent light of the kitchen, it looked even more pathetic and sinister. The cover was plain brown cardboard, stained with damp and dirt. There was no name, no title, just the book. I hesitated for a long moment, standing there by the counter. Part of me screamed to just throw it away, burn it, pretend I never saw it. I flipped through the pages, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. Each entry was a chilling glimpse into our lives, seen, or rather heard from below. He cut the grass today, took him almost 2 hours, left the mower out again, careless. That was me. I had cut the grass the weekend before we left for the trip and I had forgotten to put the mower away immediately. She burned the toast this morning. Smell came down through the floor vent near the warm pipe. Smell of smoke, then yelling. The deeper I read, the more unsettling it became. The observations shifted from simple chronicling to something more personal, more invasive. The boy cries at night sometimes. Nightmares. He calls for his mom. She doesn't always come right away. My son Michael, he'd been having bad dreams lately. How could they know that? The sounds must travel incredibly well through the old floorboards and vents. She sings in the shower, off-key, thinks no one can hear. That was Sarah. I couldn't read anymore that night. I shoved the notebook into a kitchen drawer underneath the placemats, feeling ridiculous hiding it like some forbidden object. But I couldn't let Sarah or the kids see it. How could I even begin to explain? Honey, I think someone's been living in our crawl space and keeping a detailed diary about us. It sounded insane. I felt insane. That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the house, every sigh of the wind outside sounded like movement from below. The next morning, I felt hungover from fear. I tried to act normal around Sarah and the kids, forcing smiles, making breakfast, pretending the horrors of the notebook weren't screaming in my head. But everything felt tainted. When Michael spilled his milk, the sound of it hitting the floor made me jump, my eyes instinctively darting downwards. When Sarah laughed at something on the radio, that loud laugh mentioned in the diary, I flinched internally. I kept glancing towards the basement door, expecting. I pushed the plywood aside completely this time, the scraping sound echoing unnervingly in the basement silence. The stale, human-adjacent smell wafted out again, maybe even stronger than before. Holding the flashlight beam steady, trying to ignore the tremor in my hand, I swept the light across the interior. Dirt floor, pipes, wires, the usual subterranean guts of a house. But as my eyes adjusted, scanning the cramped space, I started seeing things I'd missed in my initial panicked discovery. My gaze drifted upwards, following the pipes and wires snaking across the rough wooden joists, the underside of our living room floor. And that's when I saw the drawings. Scratched into the wood, faint and crude like a child's unsupervised work, but deeply unsettling. They weren't random doodles. One looked like a stick figure representation of our house, with jagged lines indicating sound waves coming from upstairs. I scrambled back out of the crawlspace opening, my heart hammering, dust clinging to my clothes. I quickly slid the plywood back into place, wedging the brick against it more firmly this time, though it felt like a pathetically inadequate measure. Backing away, I scanned the basement, suddenly seeing every shadow as a potential hiding place, every corner as suspect. Had they heard me? Were they hiding somewhere else down here now, behind the furnace or amongst the old boxes? That entry changed everything. The knowledge that they knew I'd found the diary, that they were still there and documenting my fear, shifted the dynamic entirely. It wasn't just me uncovering a secret anymore. It was a silent, terrifying game of cat and mouse, played out across the floorboards of my own home. Who was the cat and who was the mouse? I felt like both, hunting for answers while simultaneously being hunted, observed. The nights became the worst. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid nightmares inspired by the diary's contents, and the crude drawings in the crawlspace. I'd dream of hands reaching up through the floorboards, of whispers slithering from the vents, of that jagged, smiling face hovering in the darkness. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, convinced I could hear faint scratching sounds from below. I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside the bed, a heavy wooden one from my college days. The next day, fueled by sleeplessness and mounting terror, I decided I couldn't live like this anymore. The constant looking over my shoulder, the fear in my own home, the secrets, it was destroying me. I needed irrefutable proof, something I could show the police, something that would force action. Hiding the diary felt cowardly now. I thought about setting up a camera, maybe a motion-activated one pointing at the crawlspace entrance. My blood ran cold. Knowing about the box under the floorboard wasn't something they could have overheard. It wasn't something they could have deduced from sounds traveling through vents. That required visual access. Had they been inside the house proper, not just confined to the crawlspace, the thought was paralyzing. Had they crept up from the basement while we were sleeping, while we were out, walked through our rooms, touched our things, stood over our beds, the violation felt absolute, complete. A pressed flower from Black Creek, where we camped, where the unease had first started. How did it get here inside my most secret hiding place? Had the writer followed us on the trip, watched us from the trees just like I'd felt, and then brought this souvenir back to their den beneath my house, only to somehow slip it into my lockbox? The implications were staggering, terrifying. That flower broke something in me. The fear turned into a cold, simmering anger. This wasn't just some passive observer anymore. This was an active threat, someone playing games, violating our space, leaving creepy little calling cards. They had crossed a line, my line. I couldn't involve the police yet. What would I show them? A diary I found, a flower. They'd think I was crazy, paranoid after a bad trip. No, I had to handle this myself. I had to confront it. Midnight, the house was finally quiet. Sarah and the kids were asleep upstairs. I could hear the faint, rhythmic sound of Sarah's breathing from our bedroom as I stood in the upstairs hallway listening. The silence felt different tonight, not menacing but expectant. Like the house itself was holding its breath. I strapped on the headlamp, its beam off for now. Then, gripping the crowbar, I crept down the stairs, each step deliberate, silent. Empty, my beam swept across the space, lingering on the flattened cardboard, the water bottles, the wrappers, the disturbing drawings scratched into the wood above. Everything looked exactly the same as when I discovered it, except the notebook was gone. I distinctly remembered leaving it tucked behind the pipe after my first panicked look. Now that spot was bare earth. Had they taken it back, or had they moved it somewhere else? I slowly backed away from the opening, never taking my eyes off the black rectangle, the crowbar still held tight in my sweaty grip. My headlamp beam bounced nervously as I retreated across the basement floor. Maybe they had gone. Maybe the confrontation I'd steeled myself for was unnecessary. Maybe it was finally over. The thought brought a sliver of relief, fragile and tentative. I reached the bottom of the basement stairs, turned and started heading up, the crowbar now feeling heavy and slightly ridiculous. I didn't move for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Every horror movie trope, every primal fear screamed at me not to go up there. But Sarah, the kids, they were up there, unaware, defenseless. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, I forced my legs to move, taking one silent step, then another, the crowbar held ready again, though it felt utterly futile now. Reaching the top of the stairs, I peered into the dimly lit upstairs hallway. Empty. You ever get that feeling deep in your gut, that primal knowing that something is fundamentally wrong, even when your eyes tell you everything's fine? That's how it started for me, out in Blackwood Forest. We were supposed to be roughing it, me and Ben. Just two buddies, a tent, a campfire, miles from anywhere. But the silence out there, it wasn't empty. And the first night, wedged between some mossy boulders near our tent, we found it. An old, beat-up portable radio. Probably just picking up atmospheric interference, Ben muttered, trying to sound nonchalant, but his voice was a bit too tight. He fiddled with the tuning knob again, twisting it back and forth. The static didn't change pitch or volume much, just stayed this constant, oppressive shhhhhhhhhhhhhh. But then, Something happened. A twig snapped loudly just beyond the firelight. Both our heads whipped around. Nothing there, just deeper darkness and the swirling fog. We tried to brush it off, chalk it up to campfire jitters and too many ghost stories. We cracked open a couple of beers, forced some conversation about work, about anything other than the creepy radio sitting silently on the rock like a forgotten idol. But the ease was gone. Every creak of a branch, every distant hoot of an owl sounded amplified, menacing. Later that night, huddled in the tent, the silence was even worse. Every tiny rustle against the nylon, every distant, unidentifiable sound from the woods felt magnified, amplified by the oppressive quiet left behind by the static. Sleep was impossible. My mind kept replaying that heavy hissing sound, overlaying it onto the natural noises outside. Ben was pretending to be asleep, his breathing too even, too controlled. I knew he was just as spooked as I was. Morning couldn't come soon enough. When the first gray light started filtering through the fog, we practically scrambled out of the tent, desperate for the illusion of safety that daylight brings. The fog was still thick, clinging to everything, visibility maybe 20 feet. The campsite looked undisturbed. The fire pit was cold ash, our gear was where we left it. And the radio, it was still sitting on the rock, exactly where we'd left it. But something was wrong. "Okay, that's it," Ben said, his voice grim. The forced nonchalance was gone, replaced by a flinty resolve I hadn't seen before. "We're getting rid of this thing." He walked over, grabbed the radio firmly, ignoring the way my skin crawled just watching him touch it. "Let's take it deep, bury it, smash it, I don't care. I want it gone." I agreed immediately, relief washing over me. Maybe destroying it would break whatever connection it had formed, silence the static for good. Ben finished digging a shallow hole, maybe a foot deep. He looked at the radio, then at me, a strange mix of fear and defiance in his eyes. "Right," he said, his voice tight. "In you go." He tossed the radio into the hole. It landed with a dull thud on the soft earth. For a moment nothing happened, just the silence, the fog, the drip of condensation from the leaves above. Then the radio crackled, loudly. A burst of static, much sharper and more aggressive than before, erupted from the hole. He didn't stick around. We practically sprinted back towards the campsite, stumbling over roots, pushing through wet branches, the fog making everything look unfamiliar and threatening. The silence that accompanied us was unnerving, broken only by our ragged breathing and the squelch of our boots on the muddy ground. Every shadow seemed too deep, every tree looked like a lurking figure. When we finally burst back into the small clearing of our campsite, relief was short-lived. Everything looked the same. Panic started to set in, a cold knot tightening in my stomach. We quickly decided packing up and hiking out was the only option. Forget the gear if we had to, just get out of Blackwood Forest, away from the fog, away from the lingering static. We started stuffing sleeping bags into sacks, collapsing the tent poles with trembling hands, constantly glancing over our shoulders into the impenetrable gray wall of fog surrounding us. We didn't need to say anything. We abandoned the half-packed tent, grabbed only our backpacks with water and essentials, and started moving. Fast. We picked the direction we thought led back to the main trail, plunging into the dense, foggy woods. Visibility was still terrible, maybe 15 feet at best. Trees loomed out of the gray mist like spectral figures, their branches like grasping arms. The silence was broken only by our panicked footsteps and ragged breaths. The static seemed to coalesce, the random noise floor starting to take on a horrifying shape. Beneath the overwhelming shhhhh, faint whispers began to emerge, swirling within the white noise like currents in a river. They weren't distinct words, not at first, just sibilant, breathy sounds that slithered at the edge of hearing. It sounded like dozens of voices whispering simultaneously, overlapping, canceling each other out, yet forming a coherent, malevolent presence. Then Ben did something stupid, or maybe desperate. He broke eye contact with me, his face wild with terror, and just ran. He bolted blindly into the fog, away from the direction we thought was the trail, deeper into the static-filled woods. "Ben, wait!" I screamed, my voice cracking, swallowed by the oppressive hiss. I started after him, but it was like running through water. The fog was so thick, the static so disorienting. I forced myself to move, driven by sheer survival instinct. Running blindly seemed like suicide, so I tried to regain some sense of direction, focusing on the faint slope of the ground, hoping it led downwards, towards the river, maybe towards the edge of this damned fog bank. The static persisted, a constant pressure against my ears, the whispers weaving in and out, sometimes sounding like Ben calling for help, sometimes like rustling leaves, sometimes like something utterly inhuman. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to warp in the fog and static, stretching and compressing. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the fear pushed me onward. The static remained my constant companion, sometimes fading slightly, sometimes surging louder, the whispers within it becoming more insistent, more personal. They started referencing things they shouldn't know, a childhood fear of the dark, a specific argument I'd had with Ben before the trip. I froze, staring at the radio. It couldn't be real. A hallucination brought on by fear, exhaustion, the incessant static messing with my perception. That had to be it. But it looked so solid, so undeniably there. The cracks in the plastic, the bent antenna, every detail was exactly as I remembered. Hesitantly, driven by a morbid curiosity I couldn't suppress, I took a step closer. The static emanating from it seemed to intensify, the whispers becoming clearer, sharper. "Welcome back, Alex." The static held steady for a long moment, thick and oppressive. Then a new sound began to filter through. A voice. Not the dry whispers, but a single, clear voice. Distorted, yes, like it was coming through a faulty connection, crackling and popping, but undeniably a voice. And it was saying my name. "Alex," it crackled, the sound seeming to echo from the radio's cheap speaker. "Alex, can you hear me?" My heart leaped into my throat. It sounded familiar, horribly, sickeningly familiar. Rage surged through me, eclipsing the fear for a moment. A primal need to fight back, to silence that mocking voice, to smash this conduit of misery. I looked around frantically, spotting a heavy, broken tree branch lying nearby, thick as my arm. I lunged for it, my movements clumsy with adrenaline. I hefted the branch, its rough bark scraping my palms. It felt solid, real, a weapon against the intangible horror of the static. I turned back to the radio, raising the branch high above my head. The silence was beautiful but unnerving. After the constant assault of the static, the absence of it felt vast, empty. I stood there for a long moment, catching my breath, straining my ears. No whispers, no hiss. Just the natural sounds of the forest slowly beginning to return, a distant bird call, the rustle of wind higher in the canopy. The fog even seemed to be thinning, patches of pale gray sky visible overhead for the first time. Hope flickered within me. Just as I was starting to feel genuinely hopeful, just as the trees began to thin out enough that I thought I might be approaching a road or the edge of the forest, my phone buzzed in my pocket. My heart leaped. A signal, finally. I fumbled it out, my hands shaking slightly. The screen lit up, not with signal bars, not with missed calls. It displayed that same horrifying, flickering digital static pattern I'd seen earlier. But this time, it wasn't inert. I dropped the phone as if it were burning hot. It clattered onto the damp leaves, the screen still glowing with that awful message, that flickering static. I backed away slowly, my eyes darting around the now too quiet woods. The trees seemed to lean in, the shadows deepening even as the fog lifted. The feeling of being watched was back, intensely, suffocatingly. It wasn't distant anymore, it felt like it was right behind me, breathing down my neck. The silence stretched, thick with menace. And then, it started.